It's been more than 450 days since Russia invaded Ukraine. We've already seen many battles, a number of offensives and counter-offensives. But one episode continues to capture public imagination: the Nord Stream sabotage. Last September, 2 gas pipelines were hit by clandestine bombings, Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. Both of them carry gas from Russia to Germany. But who launched the attack? That depends on who you ask. The Russians blame US and allies. Ukraine says it doesn't know. And some European countries blame Russia. But now the plot has gotten thicker. The Washington Post has released a bombshell report. What does it say? 3 major things. Number 1, the CIA knew that Ukraine was planning such an attack on Nord Stream. They got the tip-off in June. So around 3 months before the sabotage, a European intelligence agency got this report. It was then relayed to the US and Germany. Number 2, the plan was to use a small team of divers. They would report directly to Ukraine's commander-in-chief. And number 3, President Zelensky was not in the loop. This was done by design. Ukraine wanted Zelensky to have plausible deniability. Like you see in movies, he didn't know about it, so he wasn't responsible. Now, this report is based on leaked secret documents. They were published by a US soldier on the Discord platform. The claim that stands out is this: Washington knew Ukraine had plans to strike Nord Stream. They knew by June 2022, and 3 months later, the attack actually happens. Was that a coincidence? Well, there is no such thing in war. The idea that Ukraine plotted the attack is not new. Take a look at this New York Times report. US officials blamed pro-Ukrainian groups for the sabotage. What they lacked was evidence, maybe a smoking gun. Could this leaked intelligence report be that evidence? It's certainly possible. But beyond fixing blame, this report could alter the balance of the war. You see, Western aid to Ukraine comes with a condition: that Kiev will only defend, not attack. That Ukraine will fight within its territory. But Nord Stream doesn't fit that condition. It is located hundreds of kilometers away in the Baltic Sea. Its military value is nil, but politically it's a big risk. If Ukraine is implicated, Western powers may have to rethink their support. So far, there is no indication of that, but European countries have not concluded their probe. If Ukraine is directly named, it could be in trouble. Just put yourself in Europe's shoes. How would you feel if your ally blew up your biggest pipeline? And worse, lied about it. That's one part of the problem. The second is the style of attack. Ukraine seems to be relying on shadow warfare. We have seen sabotage incidents across Russia. We have seen drones over Moscow. We have also seen pro-Ukraine militia storming Russian towns. On paper, Ukraine has nothing to do with it. But let's be real. US officials believe this is Ukraine's new strategy: to use covert tactics, and it has 2 advantages. 1, it helps to build pressure on Russia, and 2, Zelensky is insulated from it. All decisions are purposely hidden from the president, which means he is not lying when he denies it. Now, we are in no place to judge any of these tactics. Russia has killed hundreds of innocent Ukrainians. It has launched an unprovoked war. So Ukraine is free to use any strategy they see fit. But the downside is this: the Americans are still uncomfortable about taking the fight to Russia. Hence their initial hesitation about fighter jets or long-range missiles. How will they react to such Ukrainian strategies? Ultimately, that's what matters. Ukraine isn't the only problem. America has to worry about China too. When Biden took over the White House, he pledged to manage America's differences with China. But this approach has proved to be challenging. Tensions have escalated in recent years, dangerous military encounters have increased, and communication channels have remained frozen. Until now, US and China now want to talk. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is all set to visit China this month. It is an attempt to stabilize the relationship. But before Blinken sits down to talk, the US and its allies are facing fresh provocations from the PLA. Our next report brings you the details.
A close call in the South China Sea. And a near miss in the Taiwan Strait. Tensions between the US and China are at an all-time high, and these close encounters are only raising the stakes. Today, there was yet another provocation from the PLA. This time, the target was South Korea. Chinese and Russian aircraft made aggressive moves. They entered South Korea's Air Defense Identification Zone, or ADIZ. This is like a border in the skies. When you enter this area, you need to identify yourself. Otherwise, any plane can be considered as hostile. But Chinese and Russian jets went in unannounced. Beijing said they were on a joint patrol. But for Seoul, the move was a provocation. In response, they scrambled their own jets. Diplomatic protest followed. The South Koreans say such flights can cause tensions in the region. They are not the only ones who are complaining. Earlier this week, Japan was targeted too. Russian and Chinese bomber planes showed up in the Sea of Japan. These planes flew together till the East China Sea, where two more Chinese fighter jets joined the formation. Just like its neighbor, Japan too scrambled its jets in response. Why are the hostilities rising? The actions of China and Russia coincide with military exercises in the region. The US and its allies have been doing drills in the Indo-Pacific. Countries like South Korea, Japan, and the Philippines have participated with large contingents. That's not all. The US has stepped up its deployments in the region too. The expanded presence is supposed to be a deterrence. Instead, they're leading to more close calls. Recently, the US Defense Secretary admitted these encounters could lead to dangerous outcomes.
Provocative intercepts of our aircraft and also our allies' aircraft. That's very concerning, and we would hope that they would alter their actions. But since they haven't yet, I'm concerned about at some point having an incident that could very, very quickly spiral out of control.
Washington has been seeking a dialogue with Beijing. For weeks, China was reluctant, but recently it had a change of heart. There has been a flurry of high-level contacts. First, CIA Director Bill Burns visited Beijing. A secret visit happened in May at China's invitation. Then, the US National Security Advisor met with Wang Yi, China's top foreign policy official. They met in Vienna for 2 days. Then this week, there was another meeting. Two senior American officials met with their counterparts in Beijing. The talks seem to have paved the way for another high-level meeting. Secretary of State Antony Blinken will now visit China. But ahead of Blinken's arrival,
the truth is that the US warships and jets traveled all the way to China's doorstep to provoke, insisting on conducting close-in reconnaissance near the airspace and territorial waters of China and flexing their military muscles. This is not safeguarding freedom of navigation, but promoting navigation hegemony. It is a blatant military provocation, which is the root cause of maritime and air security risks.
And that's the major flashpoint, the growing military developments, and the lack of communication channels between the two armed forces. The military-level dialogue is yet to be revived, and without that, the risk of a dangerous escalation will continue to remain high.
It's the biggest headline in global sports, except it's more political than sports. A major golf merger has been announced. 3 parties are involved: PGA Tour, which looks after golf in North America, DP Tour, which handles the European leg, and Live Golf, which is a breakaway league funded by Saudi Arabia. It's hard to explain how big this is, so to make it easier, let's understand the basics. PGA Tour was the top dog in golf. They organized most of the big events. They also had contracts with all major golfers. But one important side note: PGA is not a commercial entity. It is a non-profit organization. Last year, a new entity entered this world: Live Golf. It is funded by the PIF, or the Public Investment Fund. The PIF is Saudi Arabia's sovereign fund, so deep pockets. In 2022, they offered lucrative contracts to PGA golfers. We're talking millions of dollars. A lot of them left PGA and began playing for Live Golf, like Dustin Johnson, Cameron Smith and Phil Mickelson. But as always, the empire struck back. PGA sued players who violated their contract. Some big names also came out in support. None bigger than these two, Tiger Woods and Rory McIlroy. Live Golf offered Tiger Woods $800 million, but he said no. McIlroy got a $400 million offer, but he too rejected. There were two main reasons behind their decision. One was the legacy of golf. The Saudi League had new styles of play. It wasn't the true essence of golf. And two, the Saudi stigma. The PIF and Saudi Arabia are one and the same. Not everyone wanted such an association. They refused to be part of the sports washing. But cut to Tuesday, all that went down the drain. Apparently, PGA and Live Golf had been talking for a while. The new plan is to merge and create a new entity. It won't be non-profit. It will be purely commercial. The PIF is also promising to invest billions of dollars into this new entity. I know everyone is calling it a merger, and on paper it is. But for all practical purposes, this is a hostile takeover. Saudi Arabia will now run golf. It's not a proud moment for PGA chief Jay Monahan. He had promised to fight Live Golf in 2022. Now he says circumstances change.
I recognize that people are going to call me a hypocrite. And anytime I've said anything, I said it with the information I had at that moment. And I said it based on someone that's trying to compete for the PGA Tour and our players. And so I accept those criticisms. But circumstances do change, and I think that, in looking at the big picture and looking at it this way, that's what got us to this point.
PGA says the merger will end divisions, but the opposite is happening. Some golfers have come out in open criticism. A, they were not consulted about the deal, and B, many of them turned down lucrative contracts with Live Golf. They did so to protect PGA, the same PGA which has now betrayed them. So what happens next? All legal cases between PGA and Live Golf will end. Logical, since they have merged. Also, players who joined Live Golf can go back to PGA tours. So no more Live golfers and PGA golfers. Everyone can play everywhere. I know it's a bit technical if you don't follow golf, but like I said, this is also about politics. Saudi Arabia is not a golfing country. It's not like they are emotionally invested in the sport. This is pure sports washing. Saudi Arabia is using its money to take over golf. You may ask, why golf? Because the sport was struggling for relevance. Viewership was down, prize money and advertising was down. So Saudi Arabia's petrodollars were too good to refuse. But don't think it's only golf. Saudi Arabia's PIF has bought 75% stake in 4 national clubs. They are planning to splurge. Cristiano Ronaldo already plays there. Karim Benzema joined this week. And rumor is Lionel Messi could be next. Saudi Arabia's plan is to use sports to hide the bad stuff. Things like human rights abuses or their treatment of women. Experts call this strategy sports washing. It has led to backlash from rights organizations and activists. Even the golf merger has been criticized. Families of 9/11 victims have slammed the PGA Tour. Remember, the attackers on 9/11 were Saudi citizens, but none of it seems to matter. Not the rebellion by players, not the criticism by fans, not the backlash from rights organizations. All that matters is the money. I guess PGA chief Jay Monahan had refused even a meeting with Live Golf. But now he's effectively sold out to Riyadh. Don't ignore this story because it's boring old golf, because it could be your favorite sport next. When was the last time you used a check? It's probably been a while, right? Because using check has become a rare occurrence. They are old-fashioned, costly and time-consuming. With banking at our fingertips, who wants to visit an actual bank to deposit a check anymore? As ancient and taxing as this sounds, There was a time when checks were the hot new payment tech. This was in the years after World War II, when newly affluent households across the world adopted checks. But now, these pieces of paper are a remnant of labor-intensive banking era, which is why many countries want the check to check out of their banking system. And Australia is one of them. It has signed the check's death warrant, and the land down under wants to end its use by 2030. But this is not too surprising. Over the past decade, there has been a 90% decline in the use of checks in Australia, which have become a mere legacy payment in the country. Only a small number of them are being used. The government says 98% of personal checks and 100% of those in commercial settings can be serviced through internet banking. So what's the plan? A winding down process is expected, and the government plans to begin it soon. The banking system will now have to reduce its dependence on checks and move on to use other payment methods. They have a deadline for this. They need to transition by 2028. And by 2030, the use of checks will be completely discontinued. The government wants this transition to be gradual and coordinated. Question is, why now? If checks have been on a continuous decline, why is Australia suddenly thinking about them? Because big changes are underway, and the country is actively bracing for the digital era. So it is introducing a range of payment reforms, and discontinuation of checks is just one of them. It is setting out a roadmap because it wants to modernize their payment infrastructure. And Australia isn't the only one doing so. Many countries have reduced using checks. Some have even stopped altogether. In India, the share of check payments has been steadily declining. It reduced from 14% in 2010 to 3% now. In the UK, checks now account for less than 1% of retail bank payments. Germany, Sweden and Norway use almost no written checks. Finland abandoned the personal check in 1993. Poland followed suit in 2006. So countries are reducing their dependency on checks. And what is their new financial love affair? Digital payments. More and more countries are transitioning to digital money transfers, depending on contactless, real-time payments. 2/3 of adults worldwide now make or receive a digital payment, whose share in developing economies grew from 35% in 2014 to 57% in 2021. And this change was further spurred by the pandemic, which increased the use of digital payments, especially in low and middle income economies, where over 40% of adults made online payments for the first time since the start of the pandemic. In India, more than 80 million adults made their first digital merchant payment after the start of the pandemic, while in China, over 100 million adults did. So everyone seems to be moving on to greener, faster, more real-time pastures. But let's remember that checks aren't without their advantages. Many corporate bodies still want to use them. They believe the process of clearing checks deters cyber criminals. Many small businesses too depend on checks. So do people who aren't adept to online payments. But as useful or emotional as this sounds, the times are changing. More countries are looking to digital payments, and maybe soon it will be time for checks to check out. And now it's time for Vantage shots, images that tell the story. Norway, Finland and Sweden are holding joint military drills. It is called the Arctic Challenge 23. Personnel from 14 countries and about 150 aircraft are participating. In the United States, 2 chimneys were downed in Pennsylvania. Their operation was halted in April 2022. And in UK, tiger cubs went swimming for the first time in a London zoo. And finally, what makes June 7th significant? We're taking you back in history. On this day in 1975, the first ever Men's Cricket World Cup began in England. India and England played the first match of the tournament. England won the first match, but West Indies won the first ever World Cup. We leave you with that. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Get down!